Hello everyone, and welcome to year 6 of our dog pack challenge. This year is absolutely insane and one of the most dramatic years in all of my Clangen series, to be honest. But before we jump in, I have a quick recap of what's going on basically. So many of you will remember that the pack is being hunted by a cougar that lives in their territory. It has snatched up many dogs and injured many others. Many dogs in the pack wish to hunt down the cougar and kill it themselves, and this was first suggested by Chickpea, the wolfhound. The rest of the dogs wished to leave and escape the danger of the cougar. This was Atlas, the deputy's idea. Comet, the leader, is confused and uncertain. He's tired and afraid and old, and he's scared of what the future holds for the pack. We will get to his decision for the pack in a little bit. Something else to note is that there is an abandoned town to the far north of the territory. Jenna originally found it, and this town is where Wisp and Radar come from. Okay, those are the important details. Also, P.S. I'm a little bit sick, so if I sound stuffy, I'm sorry. But let's go ahead and get into the chaos. This year we will be going in sort of chronological order. Hopefully that's not confusing for everyone. And we will be starting, unfortunately, with Leola and Lucky. Leola wasn't with the pack for very long before she died peacefully in her sleep. She was going on 17 years old and was obviously struggling with her age. She had a very difficult life, but she was grateful for the peace she had found in her final moments. Unfortunately, it seems Lucky's luck has finally run out, and he ended up getting a wound on his leg after getting caught in a briar patch. The wound was infected, and he died. It was a pretty shocking death, since Lucky had outrun death so many times before. Next is a new face to the pack, Darcy. She is a big, fluffy, old English sheepdog who found her way to the pack after being abandoned by her human. She had been a very accomplished herding dog, as her breed would suggest. Unfortunately, after working through a very cold and rainy night, Darcy caught white cough and became incredibly ill. Instead of taking responsibility for her human abandoned her in the forest far from their home. He had plenty of other sheepdogs to take her place. When the pack found her ill and starving, they didn't think twice about helping. She is an incredibly sweet dog that loves to tell stories and loves to hang out with puppies. She has recovered well from her illness thanks to the only healer we have left in the pack, Oliver. He has had an incredibly difficult year, and we will get to what happened to poor Oliver in a later section. Just know that now, despite only being 2 years old, he's the only healer of the pack. This year, these two old ladies finally decided to retire. I mean, it's about time. Dude is almost 14 years old, and Chickpea is almost 12, which is quite old for such a big dog. They've both been essential members to the pack, especially Dude. Speaking of Dude, this year was one of her most miserable yet. When she first joined the pack, she had a litter of pups, and a couple didn't survive long after birth. Of the 5 that survived to adulthood, there is now only 1 puppy left. We will get to them in a little bit. On top of this, Dude lost one of her grand pups this year, and she is truly devastated. Despite the pain and sorrow she feels, she is a strong dog and refuses to be taken down. The pack needs her guidance now more than ever. Chickpea lost both of her sons this year and is feeling incredibly guilty. She thought she was making the right decision, but it has cost her and the pack dearly. Our next dogs are an odd trio, but you will soon understand why they're together. One evening, Pigeon went out searching for food with her father Atlas. She loved spending time with him more than anything. They hadn't made it far from the base when the scent of the cougar drifted to them, and in an instant it was upon them. Pigeon and Atlas fought ferociously, and the sounds of the battle alerted some of the members of the pack. Flying in to assist them came Bat and Cielo, and a couple others. Bat had always loved Pigeon, and he fought bravely to save her, but he was the first to fall. He was so much smaller than the other dogs. He was an easy kill, unfortunately. Cielo was much bigger and even rivaled the cougar in size, but the cat gave him a fatal slash that Cielo could never have recovered from. Pigeon, in the heart of the battle, shoved her father from the cougar's outstretched claws and took a rake to the back. When more reinforcements arrived, the healer could do nothing for her. When the sounds of the battle rang out through the forest, Bandit was on his paws in an instant and rushing to help the squealing dogs. As he ran, he heard paw steps behind him and glanced back to see his son racing at his side. Bandit begged Rascal to return home, but the pup refused and ran into the fray of the battle with him. Bandit was shocked at how fierce and quick Rascal was. The pup chomped on the back leg of the cougar while it was distracted and tried to drag the large cat away by its tail. When Bandit saw the cougar slash down Pigeon, the coonhound raced in and without thinking leapt straight for the throat of the lion. Despite his best efforts, Bandit was not a fast dog and the cougar saw him coming. Rascal howled for Bandit, but it was too late. A slash across the face left Bandit bleeding out in the forest. Rascal charged fearlessly and stood over his dying father, teeth bared at the cougar. The young pup's eyes were wild with fear, but the cougar felt no fear. When the healer and reinforcements arrived, everyone was dead and Rascal was nowhere to be found, save for a trail of blood that led away from the crime scene. Comet is lost and absolutely devastated over the battle that occurred. He feels responsible for the deaths the pack has seen, but he doesn't know what to do. In one ear, Atlas is begging the leader to abandon the forest territory and find a new home before anyone else is hurt. In the other ear, Chickpea and several other dogs are howling that they should kill the cougar now. The battle wounded the cat, and they would be able to easily dispatch it. Comet couldn't stand it anymore. Despite being the leader, he decided to just hold a vote. Atlas pleaded with Comet, but the pit bull couldn't be responsible for any more deaths. He took the coward's way out and allowed the pack to choose their own fate. He left it up to a vote. Atlas was devastated at Comet's choice and can't believe this is the same leader he has stood beside for so many years. As the pack began to vote, it was painfully clear that they would be going to kill the cougar. The deputy hung his head in defeat. He had lost his mate and now his daughter to this creature. He had now seen firsthand the devastation it could cause. Despite all of the death the pack had seen, Atlas knew they would only see more by trying to fight this creature. And soon after, Atlas retired. Before the final assault on the cougar, some peace was needed in the pack. Lucy and Wisp, who had been spending a lot of time together, had grown incredibly fond of one another. They were more than best friends, but they weren't romantic with one another. But the two of them knew they wanted to spend their lives with each other. Wisp and Lucy announced that they would be partners for the rest of time. They would love each other in every possible way as the best of friends. It was a devotion different than the bond of mates, but still just as deep. When Wisp volunteered for the group that would hunt down the cougar, Lucy was distraught. She had already lost a son to the creature and nearly lost her other son this year. Now she was expected to lose her life partner. Yes, it was expected of her, and Lucy never saw Wisp again. It seemed only fitting that the two most experienced and toughest guardians of the pack would be the leaders of the patrol that set out to kill the cougar. Rumble honestly didn't want to go, but he knew as one of the largest dogs of the pack, they would need him. Mabel knew that she had to go. This cougar had taken Cielo and Bandit from her two dearest friends. Jenna, her best friend, was going on this mission as well, and Mabel would need to be chained down before she let Jenna go without her. Mabel has lost much in her life, and she's incredibly tired of losing. She and Rumble led the patrol out of the base camp. A silent rage flickering through each of the dogs, they tracked the scent of the lion to its cave den on the mountainside. Zelda knew it was her responsibility to fight for her pack against this cougar. She was a guardian. What else was her duty than to protect the dogs who had given her a home and a purpose? She was not pleased to see Jenna would be coming along. Zelda loved Jenna, and if anything happened to her, she would never forgive herself. But she knew better than to tell Jenna not to come. The cattle dog was as stubborn as a bulldog and would never stand on the sidelines when a battle raged. Behind Maple and Rumble, these girls were the first to enter the cave. prowling low to the ground and sniffing for danger. At first they thought the cougar wasn't home, but they realized their grave mistake far too late, and they severely underestimated what they were getting themselves into. Despite his father's insistence, Oleander left with the patrol to kill the cougar. That monster had taken far too much from his family, and he was tired of living in fear. He would get revenge for his mother, and for Pigeon if it was the last thing he did. He didn't expect his old friend Smokey to join him, though. The largest dogs of the pack had volunteered to fight the beast, but Smokey had insisted that he was small and quick enough to offer as a distraction for the cat. Oleander was terribly nervous for his friend, but secretly grateful to have the terrier's support. As they had planned, Mabel and Rumble prowled into the cave first, then Jenna and Zelda. When howls of pain echoed from the cave's mouth, the rest of the patrol lunged into action, but stumbled short at the sight before them. Jenna was dangling limp from the cougar's jaw, while Zelda lay unmoving at her paws. Flanking the cougar on either side was a smaller cougar, each locked in a deadly duel with Mabel and Rumble. A third smaller cougar prowled from behind the largest cougar, hissing and spitting, its eyes full of hatred and fear. There were 4 of them. The cougar was a mother. The dogs streamed into the cave, each of them startled by the sight of the 4 cats, but nobody was willing to back down now. Cricket tore into the cave with a fury in his golden eyes. He knew it was a liability for him to be there, since he was completely deaf, but nobody questioned him when he offered to fight. The cougar had taken his brother, his mate, and one of his pups. Revenge was all he knew at this point. He streaked into the cave like a bolt of lightning, and the young wolfhound pup, Crimson, followed close behind him. The pair leapt to defend Mabel as she was backed into a corner by one of the smaller cougars. Cricket snatched the cat by its tail and bit down hard. It yowled its fury and whirled on him. Cricket released the cat and backed away while Crimson jumped into action. The younger dog fought fiercely, but he was inexperienced. His legs were gangly and ungraceful as he took slash after slash from the cougar cub. Mabel desperately raced away to join the fighting someplace else, but Cricket stayed with the wolfhound. The two took turns snapping and pounding on the cougar cub until it had finally fallen for the last time. The 2 dogs panted and smiled at each other with some sense of relief, but in a flash, something slammed into Cricket from behind. He didn't hear it coming. It cut him down and took hold of Crimson by the neck. The mother cougar was the last thing Cricket saw as he died. Aspen and Flint watched as the cougar throttled Crimson and turned her murderous eyes on the other dogs in the cave. One of the cubs had managed to kill Smokey, Wisp had taken a fatal blow to the head, and Oleander lay bleeding on the floor of the cave. Aspen could hardly comprehend that his brother was dying, after he had just lost his sister as well. Flint shoved Aspen to bring him from his daze. Cricket and Crimson had managed to kill one of the cougar's cubs, but the pack was outmatched in skill. Rumble and Mabel were both bleeding heavily and panting for each breath as they fought against the mother cougar. Crimson's sister, Willow, leapt around the cave, dodging one of the cub's attacks. And Ember stood cowering next to a rock as the last cub hissed and swiped at her. Flint raced into action to defend Ember, pummeling into the cougar cub. Aspen shook himself from his daze and ran to Rumble. "We need to retreat," he barked. The pack was overwhelmed by the cats, and they needed to run before everyone was killed. When the howl for retreat was called, Willow was partly relieved. She didn't know how much longer she could dance around the cougar cub's assaults. She had taken several slashes to her long legs, and they ached with every leap. She raced to the mouth of the cave, only glancing back to see her brother's bloody body on the floor. Her heart sank, and she raced with the surviving patrol members into the forest. Crimson had only come to make her mother proud. He was no fighter and never should have felt pressured to come on this suicide mission. The pack raced home, and Willow was greeted by her sister Aurora and her dear friend Fiona. Willow collapsed at their paws as they set to work treating her wounds. Oliver, the healer, had shown everyone how to do basic wound care for when the fighting dogs made it back home. Willow is still heavily injured, but she is insanely grateful that she wasn't killed like her brother and many of the other dogs. And she's quite bitter at her mother Chickpea for making Crimson feel like he needed to go on this mission. Ember knew she shouldn't have gone on that mission. She was small, but fast, and she thought that might be enough to save her. It was only thanks to Flint that she wasn't killed by that cougar cub. Her brother, though? She was the last of the pups from Dude's litter, and she would need to break the news to her mother. Not to mention her brother's pups were now orphans. Ember shuddered at the thought of Penelope and Micah feeling as alone as Ember did. She decided to raise the young pups on her own. She was their aunt, and she would do anything for them, but she still can't help but feel the sorrow wearing on her. She should have had pups with Frost, and they should have lived happily ever after. Or maybe even with Flint. She shouldn't have to bear the burden of being an only sibling and the mother to orphan nieces. She can hardly stand it, and she knows Penelope and Micah feel the pain too. After the failure of the attack on the cougars, there was no choice but to leave before the mother cougar sought retribution for her slain cub. The pack moved quickly, following the directions of Radar of all dogs. He knew a place where they could be safe from cougars. He couldn't promise that there weren't other dangers, but at least the cougar wouldn't follow them. As the pack moved, they were found by a group of humans with long sticks and leashes. Piper, Spark, Salt, Jay, Pip, Amari, River, and Oliver were all taken by the humans. When the pack found their new home in an abandoned town far north of their old territory, they were worried that none of their lost friends would be able to find them if they escaped the humans. Oliver, however, managed to find them. He is now the only healer in the pack and is taking his duties very seriously. Bliss has lost almost all of her pups and her dear sister. When Ren piped up about wanting to go fight the cougar, she had lashed out at him. She feels guilty for it now, but she had screamed at him in front of the entire pack about how selfish he was being for leaving her completely alone in this pack. How would she live if her entire family died? Bliss understands that she was the one being selfish, but she won't take back her decision to force Ren to stay with her. He feels incredibly guilty for not being able to help his packmates, but he knows his mother was right. He would have died fighting, and all for nothing. The pack still needed to move anyway. So, staying by his mother's side was the right choice, if not a very difficult one to make. Radar didn't go on the mission to hunt the cougar because he has a weak leg, and he's not a fool. He knew it wouldn't end well, and he voted against fighting. He knew they would be safe-ish in his old home, where the humans had abandoned him and Wisp. Poor Wisp. He tried to talk her out of going, but talking Wisp out of doing anything was more painful than a cougar bite. He knew he wouldn't see most of the dogs that left ever again. He was beyond relieved when Rumble returned with the survivors. Radar had asked the large dog to be his mate twice now, and had been refused both times. Whatever Rumble's motives, Radar didn't care. He loved Rumble no matter what, and he didn't want to see him hurt. Quarter Pounder wanted nothing to do with the fight with the cougar, and had also voted to leave the territory. Despite her size and skills, she refused to go fight somewhat out of principle, but mostly out of fear. She was terrified of what would happen, and too scared to stand by her packmates. She feels incredibly guilty for not going to help her friends when they needed her most. As two of the oldest dogs in the pack, Milo and Pearl have both seen their fair share of grief and loss, but this year was the hardest. Milo lost his only daughter, Jenna. When he had said goodbye to her for the last time, he thought there may be a chance she could make it home. A glimmer of hope for her. She was a tough dog and would fight to her last breath, but Milo was crushed when she didn't return home. Pearl's health is failing from the difficulties she's faced this year. She nearly lost Atlas, her oldest and closest friend, but she did lose Bandit, Rascal, and Pigeon. Despite having no blood relatives in the pack, Bandit and Atlas both considered Pearl to be family, and all of their pups considered Pearl to be their honorary grandma. Losing two grandpups and her dearest friends is too much for Pearl to handle. Her health is failing, and Atlas had to carry her the entire way to their new home in the abandoned town. Everyone is very worried for dear old Pearl. And that's all for year 6. I told you guys it was a dramatic one. So, the pack lives in a small abandoned town now. They don't know why it was abandoned, but there are many secrets to be discovered in this place. If you guys are excited to see what happens next year, let me know, and if you join me for my next video, I'll see you then.